Welcome into Body and Soul right here on 938 Live. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Daniel Martin, once again, your daily health check on 938 Live. Today we're talking about gambling and alcohol addictions. You know, we're getting into the festivities, the Lunar New Year celebrations right around the corner. Some of us may be, indulging a little bit in some quote-unquote healthy gambling and festive drinking with family and friends, right? But some people might be battling a real problem when it comes to these activities, a dangerous gambling and or addiction problem when it comes to drinking. The Cabin Chiang Mai is a world-class addiction treatment facility visiting the Singapore addiction treatment community to address issues of rehabilitation and addiction treatment, including things like what I've just mentioned, gambling and substance abuse. We're going to be learning more about their 3 circles counseling model and, of course, what you need to know when it comes to the importance of seeking help for addictions. Joining me on the program right now is Alistair Mordig. He's the program director at the Cabin Chiang Mai. Welcome, Alistair. Thank you for joining us. Let us start off with a little bit of an approach when it comes to understanding addiction. First off, what is the nature of addiction?
Well, addiction, Daniel, is a disease. In actual fact, it's an illness. So they think about 40 to 60% of addiction is genetically caused, which means you'll be born with a predisposition to seeking addictive behaviors. So it's chronic, which means it never goes away. So it's not like a cold or a flu, which is an acute illness. Once you've got addiction, or once it's developed, it isn't going to go away. It's progressive, so the symptoms will get worse as you get older, regardless of whether you are gambling and still drinking or not, because it's a primary disease. So it doesn't actually have to be caused by anything. And actually, most people's view of addiction is that you get hooked by drinking or by gambling a lot. That's not actually that common.
It is the behavior itself, the addictive aspect.
It is a midbrain-based illness that you already have. And because you have this illness, you then need to seek behaviors that give you a boost to your brain chemistry. That's basically what it is. And that's how most people get addicted. They already have an illness which makes them feel very ill, and they need to find behaviors which boost their brain chemistry and make them feel better.
And is that why it would be coming from alcohol and from gambling? There's
absolutely.
A neurological high?
It's a neurological condition that you already have where you can't feel pleasure and reward as an ordinary person would. It's self-medicating. That's essentially what addiction is. It's seeking a behavior to make yourself feel better.
In your experience, Alistair, I mean, globally, do we see large numbers of gambling and alcohol addiction? Yes,
of course. Everything's kind of culturally specific. Different cultures, different countries have slightly different ways of seeking rewards, although the addicted members of the population will have slightly culturally different ways of seeking rewards, and I think gambling is a very relevant point there, perhaps in Asia, more culturally common perhaps in other parts of the world, and also alcohol is not metabolized as well by large proportions of the Asian population. So the people who are suffering from this disease in Asia might fill that gap with gambling, as it were.
So you've got an issue that you might have been born with, this idea of addiction, compounded by the fact that you've got these environmental and ecological factors in the society that you're in, and that can result in, unfortunately, this outcome of addiction.
Of course, and of course environment can create addiction as well. So if you're from a traumatic background, or you have you've been neglected as a child, etc., that will also affect your brain chemistry and your need to seek rewards.
It's all about the reward-seeking aspect. I wonder, does it exist on a spectrum? Is there a spectrum in terms of addiction?
Yes, there are people who are more severely addicted. That's probably biologically based. So the 40 to 60% that are born addicts, if you will, they may well turn out to be more severe addicts because they've got more severe neurological issues.
And others might see addiction in a non-harmful way, maybe a less severe spectrum?
They might addicts themselves might start out that way, but there is also an ability to learn the behavior and create the disease through taking drugs. That's what most people think addiction is, but it's the least common way of getting addicted, but a lot of people do learn to get addicted. But the main point is, once you are, it isn't going to change.
Are addictions mutually exclusive? Because, like you say, it's about a reward factor that's happening here. I was going to ask you whether, inherently there's something different with gambling or drinking, or whether you can have both.
No, there's absolutely not a distinction. What we work with at the Cabin is what they now call an all addictions model, because we know it's got a biological basis. We know that all addictions are caused the same way. And so essentially, if you found that you could no longer drink alcohol because you've had external pressure applied to you, you may find that you switch to gambling.
And somebody might seek out a new alternative.
They absolutely will seek out another alternative. That is a common part of addiction, yes.
Alistair Modi is Program Director at the Rehab in Chiang Mai. They're a addiction treatment facility visiting the Singaporean addiction treatment community. We're going to be talking more about their counseling model in just a moment as we continue understanding the very nature of addictions. This continues on Body and Soul on 938 Live.
Shape up with Body and Soul.
938 Live. Welcome back to Body and Soul on 938 Live. We're understanding the very nature of gambling addictions, alcohol addictions, and an approach and a counseling model known as 3 Circles, which is utilized by the Rehab in Chiang Mai. They're a world-class addiction treatment facility visiting the Singaporean addiction treatment community for a period of time to address issues of rehab and addiction treatment. Alistair Modi joins me, Program Director at the Rehab in Chiang Mai. Alistair, let's talk a little bit about whether addicts are aware of their circumstance, because there's been a lot that's been said about things like, the addict must step forward and the addict must come to a realization and take that first step. Does an addict know that he or she is an addict?
No, usually not. Because the brain illness of addiction, it affects 3 main things. Reward, as we've spoken about. Memory, so you have very impaired memory or selective memory about how good your drinking is, when it no longer is very enjoyable, but you think it is. Your brain's trying to help you survive and feel rewarded.
Right.
Yeah? But also, it significantly affects your ability to reason things through, or your stop system, as they call it. So the reward system is the go system. Let me go for rewards, because I don't feel rewarded. I don't feel pleasure. I don't feel well. That's the addict, their natural state.
Yeah.
But the stop system, which stops ordinary people from doing stupid things, is not there. So that it's effectively been deactivated by the disease in order to help the addict pursue their drug, as it were, or their alcohol or gambling. And so absolutely they are not aware that they're addicted. They're usually in what we call denial. These days they tend to call it pre-contemplation. So they're not in a state of thinking about their addiction. They don't realize they have it, and there's a very good reason for that, because it allows them to continue and boost their brain chemistry. So it's actually a survival mechanism.
Oh gosh. I want to pick up something you mentioned earlier on, because there is this common layperson opinion that it is a choice, that you are making this choice to imbibe or engage in these behaviors. But what you were saying earlier on, that the stop mechanism is absent, so it is not a choice in many cases.
At the point where addiction is present, as evidenced by chronic relapsing, alcohol-seeking behavior, and so on, it is absolutely not a choice, and it definitely is not a set of bad behaviors.
Is there a fine line between indulgent behavior and addiction?
That's a good question. There are obviously people that abuse alcohol and like to gamble a lot and perhaps aren't addicts, and they will later pull out of that and lead a normal life. They might be stressed, they might be in a certain friendship group that's promoting that, and later they won't be, and they'll move on out of it. The test will be, will they move out of it?
Yeah.
And if they can't, they're addicted, and once addicted, always addicted. So as you may or may not know, abstinence orientation is how most treatment programs work. You have to stop because you don't have any choice, because your brain is working against you.
Yes.
You have to have zero tolerance to that addiction.
Speaking of the environment and the activities that one engages in around our festive period, the Lunar New Year celebrations, a lot of people would engage. It's a festive period after all. There's a bit of gambling, there's a bit of a little bit of drinking here on the side. How do addicts react in that kind of situation?
Well, they're going to be triggered, is the word that we would use. So triggers are internal or external cues, if you like. So internally, an addict might experience an emotion. They might feel sad or angry. They might have just had an argument with somebody, and that will be a potent trigger to go and do something to make themselves feel better. Because remember, they already feel ill because of the disease. So you add anything on top of that, like an argument, family dispute, they're going to have an internal feeling that they want to use alcohol or gamble to make themselves feel better. But then much more so, in the outside world are lots of cues or triggers, especially in this festive period. So they're going to see people gambling or see people drinking. There's going to be a whole load of emotional attachments to what that means for them. And what that means for them is, I'll feel better if I do that. And they're surrounded by these triggers. So somebody who's fully addicted to gambling or alcohol is really going to struggle in an environment that's got so many triggers.
Alistair Modi is Program Director at the CAB in Chiang Mai. They are a world-class treatment facility when it comes to addiction aspects. We're going to know more about their approach to counseling for addictions and gambling and alcohol addictions in particular. We'll continue on Body and Soul in just a moment. Stay with us. It's Body and Soul on 938 Live. We're continuing our discussion today on addictions, in particular gambling and alcohol addictions. We know, of course, that the Lunar New Year celebration's right around the corner. Will this be a tempting period for people who are afflicted by addictions? As we've discovered, it is a disease. Our guest on the program today, Alistair Modi, is Program Director at the CAB in Chiang Mai, which is a treatment facility. They're in Singapore speaking to our treatment community to talk about rehabilitation and addiction. And they're on the program today as well to talk to us about what we need to understand about this approach. Alistair, let's start understanding the signs first and foremost. Let's talk about trigger. What are the signs that somebody is an addict?
It will be mainly observed in their behaviour towards others and the way that they do apparently stupid things. Other people will look at their behaviour and think, why are they doing that? Well, the fact is, as we've just discussed, they can't stop. They cannot stop. It's impossible. They need intervening, really. Somebody needs to come in and intervene on their behalf. Occasionally, they'll hit an emotional low point that we'd call a rock bottom, and they'll stop themselves. But it is impossible to stop when you're addicted, because your brain is giving you a compelling message to seek this goal. So it will be apparent in all of the irrational decisions that they make. You know, to everybody else, it's clear that their reasoning is impaired. But to the addict, it isn't. It's part of the disease. So it will be in the decisions they make and the apparently crazy things they do, like losing large amounts of money when they're gambling, or losing their job due to drinking and then continuing to drink instead of stopping, as an ordinary person would when they've been shocked by something like that. In
the majority of cases that you've seen, has intervention always been the major trigger towards seeking treatment?
It's a significant part of the reason why our clients come to the cabin, for example. There's a significant amount of family members that have been intervened, particularly younger people, but not exclusively, also brothers, sisters, sons, daughters. There are a lot of people that come to the end of the road, as it were, and hit their own rock bottom. But you don't have to wait for that. People don't have to wait for that. If you're worried about a family member, by all means do intervene. Contact a professional here in Singapore, get the assessments done and the referral done, so you can pick up all sorts of other problems. A lot of addicts have other co-occurring problems, other psychological health issues. We can sort all that out and, if necessary, refer you on to someone more appropriate. But if you are definitely suffering an addiction, then get you help.
What if an addict is very reluctant, very resistant towards the idea of even seeking treatment? Does that mean that it's not possible, or that maybe it's just a harder road ahead?
Yeah, they almost always are. Not particularly comfortable with the idea of stopping their favourite activity. Don't forget, the whole of their brain is involved in helping them continue. So don't be put off at all by, for example, your family member's reaction to you asking them to stop or suggesting treatment. That will be their first reaction. But the more that people not so much put pressure on them, but in a constructive way try to get them to see what's going on and break through their denial, it will go in, it will filter through. The more messages that are coming through, particularly when it's delivered in a constructive way. And that's where a professional can come in, perhaps, rather than a family member, because they're impartial, and of course because they're an expert, it's received better by the addict perhaps than it might be from the family. So the family are going to need help if they're going to do an intervention.
Okay, most definitely get the advice that is necessary. Talk to me about the approach that's adopted at your facility, the 3 circles counseling approach. How is it different from traditional approaches?
3 circles is a simple tool that works better in a short duration that you might get if you went to stay at an inpatient rehabilitation centre. So, because, as we discussed, addiction is an activity that you cannot stop once you're addicted, then you need to maintain abstinence. That's the traditional wisdom. It's now backed up by science and neurological research. Someone who's addicted to an activity must stop that activity. So 3 circles is a tool.
You can't wean yourself off.
You can't wean yourself off. You can't control it. You can't manage it. You have to stop it. And so three circles allows you to develop your bottom lines, middle lines and top lines, and you put each of those in a circle. And the bottom lines are the things that you cannot do. So if you're an addicted gambler, it might sound pretty obvious, but you cannot gamble or game. Yeah, and even gaming, computer gaming, that doesn't have a monetary reward may well be a bottom line for you.
Really?
Yes, because it's so associated to winning a game, and that's what gambling is. For an alcoholic, it will be alcohol and all drugs. Unless you're having a legal drug prescribed by a doctor and you're adhering to it, that will be your bottom line. Then your middle line will be all of those behaviours which are risky and are going to trigger you. So going out in the festive period might be unwise. That might be a middle line. If you're abstaining from alcohol, you might make the decision to go on holiday then. And your top lines will be those things that lead you to healthy behaviours. So it might be prayer and meditation, it might be being part of the 12-step group, you might be doing service work with others, exercise, etc. Things which boost the reward chemicals in the brain, essentially. Feeling virtuous because you're helping another addict. Exercise, as we know, boosts brain chemistry, all the right brain chemicals, good diet, but really it's about psychological growth. So it's about entering counselling and therapy, entering support programs. You need other addicts. You cannot do just one-on-one therapy for addicts. It's not enough. Addicts need to be exposed to other addicts to break their denial.
Coming up, I want to paint a picture of what an addict would go through in terms of this program at your facility. We'll find out more with Alistair Modi, who's Program Director at the Cabin Chiang Mai, a treatment facility for addictions. Body and Soul continues in just a moment.
With Body and Soul.
Welcome back to Body and Soul on 938 Live. My guest, Alistair Modi, is Program Director at the Cabin Chiang Mai. We've been talking about addictions. Their approach is known as the Three Circles Counselling Model. Before we go into details about the Three Circles approach, Alistair, is this model built up on quite a significant amount of research and understanding and awareness?
Yes. Three Circles is used by the fellowships for the process addictions. So a fellowship is a 12-step support group, so most people will have heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. But there's also Gamblers Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. These are process addictions, not chemical addictions,
right.
and they've always used Three Circles, probably more than the actual 12-step approach, which is very handy because it doesn't contain all of the sort of pseudo-religious terminology that 12 steps does, although 12 steps is an excellent tool and still arguably the most effective treatment tool for addiction. But Three Circles is just a bit quicker and a bit more comprehensive for short, brief interventions.
Let's talk about what somebody would expect to experience were they to go through the Three Circles approach at your facility. What is the experience like?
Well, the first thing is they need to be screened and assessed. So anybody going into inpatient residential treatment will get screened and assessed. We do that here at our Singapore clinic, which is based at the Novena Medical Centre. So you would see our psychologist here in Singapore. They would assess you, screen you, make sure that you're okay to come. So if you've got any other very serious problems, there might be other medical treatment that needs to be adhered to first, particularly if you're very physically ill. Then you would come over into the program. You would essentially be screened again just to make sure nothing's changed since you came, and then settling in. The first thing that a recovering addict needs to do is gain insight into their addiction. So the first exercises, if you like, that your counsellor will be doing with you will be designed to help break the denial that we spoke about.
Yeah.
So step one of the 12 steps and the bottom lines or inner circle of the Three Circles is all designed to help you understand that you can't do this behaviour anymore. So that can be quite challenging. You'll get a lot of challenge from your peers in group therapy, especially when you're exhibiting your denial. So it's quite confrontational and challenging, but quite fun and humorous sometimes. And it's exciting to be in a step one therapy group or an inner circle therapy group. What you'll get out of that is lots of peer advice and counsellor advice that you must stop doing this activity, and once you've accepted that, you've got your bottom line.
Right.
Then the rest of the 28-day treatment program, if you sign up for that, will be based on finding those middle lines and healthful behaviours, which is where it really starts to get fun, where you really start to rediscover yourself help others in the community, doing exercise, going on excursions, having a bit of adventure in life. This is what addicts need. They're not going to sit around the rest of their lives and get bored and read books. These are people who have a natural tendency to seek thrills or fun, and so carry on doing that, but in a constructive manner.
Is this also somehow fulfilling that reward capacity? Maybe?
It does. The addict needs to pump their reward system. So rock climbing or big wave surfing would be a very good idea. Just make sure that you're good at it.
I would highly recommend the surfing aspect. Well, let's talk a little bit about the outcomes that you've seen from this. So you mentioned that this is an inpatient treatment. Is it important to be inpatient, and does that come up with better results?
Yes, it does. Inpatient treatment is fairly well evidence-based as being more effective to keep you sober long-term than just brief interventions or outpatient interventions. Okay, so don't forget, we're looking for sobriety as addicts.
Yes.
Okay, it is not an activity you can dip back into later. If you do that, it's called a relapse. You will quickly lose track of time and you'll be immersed in the addiction before you know it. So what we would call a success would be staying sober permanently. Okay, so the amount of people that stay sober for over 2 years is massively increased by inpatient rehabilitation, as evidenced by all sorts of studies like Project Match, University of Minnesota and so on. There's lots of research out there. CBT is also an excellent tool to use. We use that in conjunction with the 3 circles at the cabin. It is imperative to treat addiction because it's a chronic illness.
Yes.
Think of it like diabetes. Okay, so you can live a very healthy life. You might look more healthy than the average person does, but you must treat it daily. And if you stop treating it, the symptoms will return, you will feel ill, and then you will drink or gamble again.
Does that mean that outside of the inpatient experience for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 10 years, there needs to be some kind of maintenance, besides the things that you're doing on your own, the skills that you've learned on your own, that one must also see medical attention on a regular basis?
There must be follow-up. There must be involvement when you return to the community. So when you get back to Singapore, for example, you will follow up with our aftercare professional at Novena.
And that was Alistair from the cabin Chiang Mai talking to us about the issue of gambling addictions and alcohol addictions and their unique approach known as the 3 Circles Counseling System. That does it for today's edition of Body and Soul right here on 938 Live. I'm Daniel Martin.